Good morning, everyone. It is a great pleasure to be here. I wanted to thank the Global Business Forum of Dubai and the economists for putting this together. We've had an extraordinary day one of conference yesterday. We're going to have another great working day today. And the title that was chosen for this conference, Shifting Energies, and by watching the many fruitful discussions we had yesterday on infrastructure, on the role of cities in global development, in terms of some of the regional architecture that we have in Latin America, such as Mercosur or the Pacific Alliance, the importance of having partners like the UAE in building the Latin American future, I couldn't help but think of the words of a very important thinker for Latin America who was born in Spain, a man named José Ortega y Gasset. In one of his most famous remarks, he said that we are we and our circumstances. So the outcome of Latin America's role in the world will be very much dependent not only on the policies that Latin America itself devises, but how successfully adapted they are to the changing contours of the global economy. And I wanted to call your attention for this fact, because if we, in this room, all boarded a time machine and went back 20 years ago, and we had to describe the shifting energies between Latin America and the rest of the world, I think we would be giving a very different picture. First of all, one of the most important traits of the global economy 20 years ago is that apparently the notions of free market, freer circulation of goods and people and services were leaving their heyday. It's pretty much the outcome of the end of the Cold War, the notion that with the creation of the World Trade Organization, many of the imbalances in the global economy could be corrected through multilateralism. It was also the notion that we were marching towards globalization by means of a building blocks approach. NAFTA in North America, Mercosur in the south of South America, the European Union becoming more closely knit together by implementing not only the Maastricht Treaty, but also years later, the implementation of a common currency. And it also appeared to me that innovation, which is a very strong word today, but 20 years ago had very little to do with the concept of startup companies as the ones we have nowadays. It was all about corporate reinvention, which is basically to say, if Latin American countries were supposed to devise a strategy 20 years ago, the world they had to deal with was the world of deep globalization. But as we move our discussions to the present, my friends, I think that there is a very big dilemma facing not only Latin American, but the global scenario. And I think this dilemma can be expressed in whether either the world is going to march towards the risk of deglobalization, or whether the world is going to embark on a path of re-globalization. So for the future, not only of Latin America, the Middle East, most specifically the United Arab Emirates, this bigger picture, this clash between the trend towards deglobalization and the possibility of rebuilding our way towards reglobalization is the bigger picture, I think, that we have, in which we have to insert the notion of shifting synergies. And what are the main elements of either the deglobalization scenario or the reglobalization scenario? In deglobalization, very likely, Brexit, the elections in France and in Germany next year, we just witnessed in the United States with the election of Donald Trump, will mean more trade protectionism, more restrictions to foreign direct investment, more restrictions to financial investment. Many countries around the world will implement industrial policies based upon solely the notion of local content. So if a company like Embraer, for example, wants to do business with China, instead of exporting planes that are produced in Brazil towards China, the Chinese company will use its very powerful acquisitions capacity to have those airplanes manufactured in China's territory. So this is very much the deglobalization scenario. Apparently, this is where we're heading to, although in my heart, I think this will, at the end, not be the outcome for the global economy, for the very simple reason. In the deglobalization scenario, not Latin America, not the UAE, not the whole global economy will fare well. There are very few countries in the world that can actually benefit from this deglobalization scenario. Although some of the options may look attractive in the short run, at the end of the day, the global economy as a whole will underperform. So I think for us, ladies and gentlemen, the pattern with which we have to work and the one that will embrace the shifting synergies between Latin America and the rest of the world will be that of re-globalization. And if I can mention 3 or 4 traits that I see as crucial to this path that I think will mark our business and government strategies for the next 15 years, I think there are at least 3 points that are absolutely essential to underline. The first one is, of course, we are going to continue to see the shift of the geoeconomic meridian of the world from the Atlantic to the Pacific, right? But it's not only about the rise of China. It's about the rise of Asia, the bigger picture. Some authors like to call it the rise of Chindia, not only in economic terms, but also in demographic terms. There is a joke these days that went, if a Martian wanted to call Earth, what would be the dial code? Today, it's 1114 because the world has 1 billion people in the Americas, 1 billion people in Europe, 1 billion people in Africa, and 4 billion people in Asia. But come 20 years, which is basically tomorrow, 2 decades, it's going to be 1125 because we're going to still have 1 billion people in the Americas, 1 billion people in Europe, 2 billion people in Africa. So Africa is going to double in size in demographic terms, and Asia is going to move from 4 to 5. So a very important notion that the geoeconomic and the demographic meridian of the world, once again, moving over to Asia. This is very good news for Latin America, and it's very good news for the Middle East. Why? Because if you take into consideration countries like China and India, but also Indonesia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Bangladesh, and so forth, you're talking about a region of the world that encompasses basically 45% of the world population, which is going to grow north of 5% a year, every year, for the next 15 years. And when you're referring to an area of the world where GDP per capita is about only $3,000 a year, when you grow north of 5% every year, in a space of a generation and a half, you more than double your income per capita. And the incremental income at that level goes essentially to consuming more calories and investing more in infrastructures. And this, of course, is going to create incremental demands for the agricultural and mineral commodities in which Latin America presents so many comparative advantages. So this talk about the commodity boom being over, there is another commodity boom around the corner, which is basically the result of the consequences of this irresistible rise of Asia. So great opportunities for Latin America. And then there is a big question mark here in terms of shifting strategy. Is Latin America going to do more of the same? Simply a wave of demand coming from abroad from those commodities? Or will Latin America use the examples of countries like the UAE to diversify its economy? Diversify not only in terms of sectors, but also in terms of technology, because Latin America as a whole only invests about 1% of its GDP in research, development, and innovation. And that leads me to the second point of reglobalization, the second essence, which I think will be key for Latin America in the coming years. We are, as we all know, living the wake of the fourth industrial revolution. It's about value addition. It's about tech intensiveness. It's about a new age of talent. So the question mark for Latin America is, will Latin America shift its synergies in the sense it has to become less dependent upon commodities and build upon this talent-based infrastructure for the fourth industrial revolution? And finally, my friends, and I think this has a lot to do with the sessions we will have today, make no mistake, although many people say that the Trans-Pacific Partnership is over because of the election of Donald Trump, the trade and investment deals of the future, of which Latin America either has to be a part of or relate with, will not only be about lowering tariffs on trade and removing import quotas. It will be about common labor standards. It will be about common approaches to intellectual property rights. It will be about common standards for government acquisitions. It will be about common standards for environmental protection. So the new architecture, the new geometry of trade and investment deals will be what we could call coalitions of the willing. They will either be based upon regional considerations, as it is the case of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or they will be more like that deal that was negotiated under the umbrella of the World Trade Organization, the Information Technology Agreement, where countries present a list of goods in which they want to observe these conditions and therefore adhere to those principles. So, with this in mind, the dilemma between between the risk of deglobalization and the likely coming of reglobalization is that today we're going to have a number of very important working sessions on the Pacific Alliance involving Mexico, Colombia, Peru, and Chile, and the future of the global economy. How are they going to fare with a United States actor that may turn more protectionist? We're also going to look at Dubai's diversification model that I really think constitutes a reference to what some Latin American countries can do. We're going to look into the potential of halal as well, which creates great opportunities for food exporters coming from Latin America. And of course, right after lunch, we're going to have an opportunity to discuss with one of the world's greatest statesmen, former president of Mexico, Vicente Fox. And last but not least, we're going to close the day with a discussion on the future of my country, Brazil. So I wish you all a great working day. Thank you very much, and see you in a little while.